The studio was warm, but not comfortable. A low thrum of air conditioning hummed over the muffled chatter of the audience, whose eyes flicked between cue cards and the empty guest chair. A red live light blinked silently above the camera. Then, he walked in. Arnold Schwarzenegger, former governor, immigrant, actor, symbol, stepped onto the stage with a composed gait and a polite nod toward the front row.
No smile.
Not yet. Just a measured glance at the three women seated opposite him. Joy Behar. Sunny Hostin. Whoopi Goldberg. 3 hosts. 3 notepads. 3 rehearsed smiles already cracking at the edges. He barely settled into the chair when it started. Joy didn't wait for introductions. She leaned forward, her fingers pressing into a thick manila folder, which she slid across the table with a practiced flick. The folder spun once and stopped inches from Arnold's hand, its bold black label visible even to the front row. Ice Raids Downtown LA. The audience's low murmur flattened into a taut silence. Joy's voice cut through it like wire. Let me guess. You'll tell us how you pulled yourself up, right? Worked hard. Got lucky. The American dream. She didn't blink. But ICE isn't cleaning gyms, Arnold. They're breaking families. And right now, while we sip coffee here, there's a 6-year-old girl down the block crying because her mother was just loaded into a van. She folded her hands and leaned back. The trap was set. The ICE folder sat there like a verdict. The studio lights burned a little hotter. Arnold didn't reach for the folder. Instead, he reached for the water glass. He touched it, just touched, then lowered his hand slowly. No drink. No deflection. He placed his palm flat on the table, open, as if bracing for a blow that had already landed. He looked at Joy. Not angry. Not amused. Just still. Whoopi shifted in her seat. Sunny didn't speak. Not yet. The silence became a second host. From behind the camera, the director's voice crackled quietly in the earpieces. Hold. Let him burn. Arnold finally spoke, not to Joy, not to the hosts, but to the air between them. Would you like me to respond, or would you prefer to finish the story first? It wasn't sarcasm. It was calibration. Joy's eyebrow twitched, just enough to register on camera. You can respond, Governor. Just don't pretend you don't know what's happening out there. Arnold nodded once, a gesture that neither conceded nor agreed. Just a signal, I heard you. Then he turned his head slightly toward the live audience, and back to the folder. He tapped it once with his index finger. Not hard. Just enough for the microphone to catch the subtle thunk, a sound like a gavel without a judge. I know what that is, he said. Pause. But I also know what a line looks like. And I remember what it means to wait in one. Joy opened her mouth, but Arnold raised a finger. Not to shush. Not to silence. To hold space. His voice dropped slightly, the kind of drop that makes people lean in. You want to talk about fear? Try crossing an ocean with an accent and no safety net. Try waiting 5 years to be told your name is now legal. A few heads in the crowd nodded. Others remained frozen. Arnold turned his palm upward again, the same hand that once held medals, microphones, and now, restraint. You see a van on the street, he continued, and you feel heartbreak. I saw a gate I wasn't allowed through, and felt nothing but fire. Whoopi cleared her throat. Joy blinked twice, but didn't respond. Camera 2 caught Sunny glancing sideways, not at Arnold, but at Joy. A microsecond of visual hesitation. Backstage, a production assistant mouthed, "We're off script." Arnold leaned back slightly, not to retreat, but to return balance to the stage. So let me be clear. You asked if I'm proud. The answer is yes. Proud to have earned a country that didn't know me, and gave me a shot anyway. Not because I shouted. Because I waited my turn. A few claps emerged from the third row, hesitant, not sure if they were allowed. Studio protocol discouraged early applause during heavy segments. But someone in the back row stood. And someone else whispered, loud enough for the audio tech to catch, "Finally." Joy exhaled through her nose. She adjusted the folder, but didn't reopen it. Whoopi looked at the camera and gave a practiced smile. "We'll be right back after the break." But the view wasn't in control anymore. The air had shifted. Arnold hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't invoked party lines. He hadn't insulted a single host. And yet, he had done something far more disruptive. He had refused to perform. Instead, he had occupied silence. And that silence had started to echo. There was no cue for applause. No camera zoom. Just a stillness that pressed against the walls. Arnold hadn't moved since the break. He sat with both hands resting lightly on the table, his spine straight, his shoulders relaxed, but something in his silence felt heavier than any spoken line before it. The red on-air light blinked once. Whoopi leaned back. Joy looked down at her notepad, pretending to reread a question she wasn't going to ask yet. The only one watching Arnold, really watching him, was Sonny. And then, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, Arnold lifted his chin and turned his head toward the American flag pinned above the left panel wall, hung high, half-lit, never acknowledged. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. Just raised one hand, not fully, just enough to trace a line between his gaze and the stars on the cloth. "When you come to America," his voice was calm. Too calm. "You're a guest." He let the word guest linger. The kind of pause that forces interpretation. "You behave like one." Then, without looking away, he added, "You don't smash windows and expect dessert." Joy's lips parted, but no sound came. Someone in the third row coughed, quietly. Arnold lowered his hand. He turned back toward the table. Looked down at the folder Joy had slid toward him earlier. Ice reports, headlines, numbers, pain. He didn't open it. Instead, he lowered his voice, so much that the microphones had to rise slightly in the audio booth. "Where I come from," he tapped the table once, not as punctuation, but as memory. "We cleaned the table before asking to be seated." The sentence slid across the room like a razor under velvet. And it cut. Deep. Not in volume. In truth. There was a collective inhale from the crowd. One woman, fourth row, blue sweater, placed her hand over her chest. A man behind her nodded, slowly. Not for show. Not for camera. For himself. Even the boom MIC operator forgot to breathe. Arnold didn't look up. He didn't repeat the line. He let the silence do what words could not. Joy, searching for footing, cleared her throat. "Arnold, that's poetic, sure. But we're talking about real families here. Real fear." Her voice cracked midway, not from emotion, but from the effort to hold the frame. Arnold looked up. "And I'm talking about real respect." Sonny blinked. Whoopi sat still, unreadable. The control room buzzed with quiet chaos. One producer whispered. He didn't raise his voice. He just shifted the whole room. Camera 2 pushed in slightly. Arnold leaned forward, folding his hands. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Just anchored. "I didn't break in. I didn't shout. I waited." "You think that makes me better?" "No. It makes me accountable." He paused, just long enough for the word to ripple. "I stood in line. I memorized the civics test. I swore the oath. And I meant every word. That's not cruelty. That's commitment." He wasn't speaking to the hosts anymore. He was speaking to someone else. To the man watching from a veterans hall in Idaho. To the woman whose father crossed legally in '78 and never asked for a favor. To every viewer who felt unseen, not because they were loud, but because they played by the rules. A subtle movement near the panel. Sonny shifted in her chair. She looked at Whoopi, just for a breath, and then looked away. Not a signal. Not collusion. Just disorientation. Arnold noticed. But didn't push. He kept his voice level. "There's a reason we knock before entering someone's home. It's not weakness. It's how you say you belong." The crowd didn't erupt. There was no roar. Just an emotional hush that settled like dust, honest, undisturbed, impossible to stage. In the tech booth, someone whispered, "We're losing the segment." But what they meant was, we're losing the narrative. Arnold wasn't supposed to win this room. He was supposed to flinch, to apologize, to justify. Instead, he had claimed no higher ground, only a deeper one. He hadn't played the patriot card. He'd placed it, quietly, on the table, with the edges worn by time and proof. Then he leaned back and smiled, not at the hosts, not at the audience. To himself. Not triumph, but relief. As if he'd finally said it. Not for them, but for every guest who still knocks. The silence from Arnold's last line still lingered in the air, an aftershock disguised as calm. But Joy wasn't done. She had waited too long. Letting him control 2 full segments had already made her earpiece buzz with unspoken frustration from the booth. Now, her fingers clutched a single sheet of paper, a printed headline folded neatly, like a verdict she'd been waiting to deliver. "So what, Arnold?" she snapped. "Poverty equals crime now." She slapped the paper down on the table. "Is that what you're telling us? That if you're desperate, you don't deserve dignity?" The camera caught the paper mid-slide across the glass table. It stopped inches from Arnold's hand. The bold black headline screamed up at him, "ICE raid separates 6-year-old from diabetic mother." Joy leaned in. "These are people, not statistics. You want to talk about knocking on doors while a child is dragged out of her classroom?" Her tone sharpened like a blade held flat against a throat, not to cut, but to threaten. Arnold looked down at the paper. He didn't flinch. Didn't blink. He read the words. Then, he looked up, not at Joy, but at the audience. "I've seen desperation. No emotion. No pity. Just fact. I lived it." Joy sat back. Her posture said, "You're avoiding the point." But Arnold wasn't done. He turned toward her now, eyes direct. "But I still waited in line. A breath. I still knocked." The word landed. Knocked. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Not applied. Not registered. Not filed. Knocked. It wasn't about paperwork. It was about ritual. About respect. Something deeper than law. The audience absorbed it. You could feel the split, those who thought he had just dodged the question, and those who realized he just reframed the entire debate. Sunny leaned forward slightly, her mouth opening, but no words came. She glanced at Whoopi, but Whoopi didn't move. Crowd reactions started to ripple, not loud, not overwhelming, but consistent. A low wave of nodding heads. Someone in the second row said aloud, barely audible over the studio mics, "So did my father." Back at the panel, Joy regrouped. "Easy for you to say," she shot back. "You had biceps, cameras, opportunity. Not everyone gets to wait in line." Arnold didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he delivered a pivot, not a rebuttal, but a quiet dismantling. "Opportunity didn't greet me at the airport, Joy. It watched me mop floors at 3 a.m. It watched me read English flashcards while others slept." He turned back to the camera, subtle, but deliberate. He was no longer talking to Joy. He was talking to someone watching at home. Desperation isn't an excuse to skip the line. It's the reason we have a line in the first place. A new kind of silence took hold, this time not stunned, but split. A few claps. One cough. Then another voice, off-screen, muttering exactly. Joy stiffened. She wasn't losing the debate. She was losing the room. She reached for the paper again, but it was already done. Its impact had been absorbed and deflected. Sunny finally found her voice, soft but steady. "So you're saying that fear, real fear, doesn't justify crossing a boundary?" Arnold's head turned slowly to her. "I'm saying respect must survive fear. Or we don't have a country. We have chaos." A pause. His voice dropped. "We don't erase the door just because we're afraid to knock." There it was. The metaphor. The central image. He had spoken it now. Out loud. In the middle of chaos, desperation, and accusations. And it landed, not with thunder, but with steel. The control room registered a spike. Viewer comments lit up on the live scroll. Words like finally, truth, earned flickered like stray embers. Joy leaned back in her chair, lips pressed. Sunny tapped her pen once, then stopped. Whoopi stared ahead, expression unreadable, fingers laced tight. Arnold didn't lean forward again. He didn't have to. He had just redirected the conversation from ICE vans and border raids to the nature of belonging. He had taken a paper headline meant to bury him and turned it into a mirror. One where the audience wasn't looking at statistics anymore, they were looking at themselves. The heat under the studio lights hadn't changed, but the air had thickened. There was a flicker in Sunny Hostin's eyes, not fear, not defiance, just the faint hesitation of someone realizing they'd entered a chess match mid-game and moved too quickly. Her body leaned forward, not aggressively, but with controlled urgency. But immigrants come here because they're out of options. Arnold didn't interrupt. He simply raised his right hand, fingers splayed slightly, and held it aloft like a traffic officer calling for pause. Not to dominate. To quiet the noise before it turned into a script. The room obeyed. Instinctively. Then he lowered the hand slowly and spoke without looking at her. Respect isn't a bumper sticker you slap on your Prius. That landed. It's not a tweet. It's not a slogan you chant at rallies or print on tote bags. He turned toward her now, voice unwavering. It's what the janitor shows when he mops your hallway before sunrise. And doesn't ask for a camera. Silence. Not stunned silence. But recalibrating silence. Camera 2 pushed in. The floor director's hands froze mid-cue. Sunny blinked, once, twice, then broke eye contact for the first time. She turned her head slightly, just enough to catch the backlighted silhouette of the lead producer behind the camera bank. And she said it. Not into the mic. Not into her lapel. Just to the space between her and her earpiece. Maybe we shouldn't have gone there. It wasn't a surrender. It was a system alarm. She was no longer speaking as Sunny the host. She was speaking as the architecture itself, questioning the integrity of the foundation mid-broadcast. The control booth lit up. Two assistants turned to each other, lips tight. One muttered, "Did she just say that on air?" Arnold heard it. Of course he did. But he didn't react. Instead, he leaned forward for the first time since the opening. His voice lowered, not to whisper, but to drag the listener in. We talk a lot about freedom. But no one ever asks who cleans up after it. His hands stayed still. His posture unchanged. But something in his tone cut through the air like cold metal. You want to make America welcoming? Fine. But don't erase the front door. Polish it. Protect it. Let people earn the right to walk through it. Crowd reaction wasn't orchestrated anymore. It pulsed from somewhere deeper. A woman in the back row nodded slowly, tears welling without fanfare. A man near the aisle folded his arms tighter, not in defiance, but reflection. Whoopi adjusted her mic. She hadn't spoken in minutes. Joy, meanwhile, stared at her own note cards. But the words there felt brittle now, as if they'd been written for a different episode. Back on center frame, Arnold didn't fill the silence with defense. He let it hang. Let the audience sit inside a moral redefinition that no policy debate could compete with. Then, softly, almost like memory, he added, "If you tear down every wall just because someone knocks loudly enough, you don't have a country. You have a hallway." The audio tech in the booth exhaled audibly, forgetting he was wired into 5 channels. Unstage, Sunny remained motionless. Her right hand, still clutching a pen, lowered without writing anything. Her mouth stayed slightly open, caught between wanting to respond and knowing the next move would be worse. This was no longer about statistics or ICE folders. This was about the moral language of entry. And Arnold had seized it, not with rhetoric, but with grounded, undeniable dignity. Backstage, a showrunner scribbled on a legal pad in shaky shorthand, "Sunny, break in visual line. Panic." But it was too late. Arnold had done what few guests ever managed. He hadn't won the debate. He'd shifted the lens through which the debate was being watched. The camera pulled wide as the break ended, but the room had shrunk. Not in size, in command. Something had shifted in the last segment. The power dynamic, once seated firmly with the hosts, had begun to lean. Not dramatically. Not in one sweeping gesture. But in subtle ruptures only a live audience could feel. Arnold hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't even leaned in. But the center of gravity was no longer theirs. Joy Behar tried to reclaim it with movement. She reached for her stack of note cards, not to read, but to reassert control. Her fingers tightened as she pulled the top page forward, crumpling its edge. The paper crackled audibly against the microphone. Not staged. Not subtle. She didn't look at Arnold. Instead, eyes still locked on the script, she muttered through clenched teeth, the kind of tone that doesn't seek a reply, "So now you're the patron saint of front doors." The sarcasm was supposed to sting. It didn't. Arnold didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. He just looked at the note card in her hand, and then back to her face. Calmly. Like someone watching a house lean, knowing the foundation was already cracked. She said nothing else. The card remained in her hand. Useless. Wrinkled. Sunny sat to Joy's right, posture still, hands flat on the table. Her pen, once active, once tapping, now rested quietly beside a closed folder. The cap was off. Ink bleeding into the table. Arnold's voice came again. Low. Steady. Not provocative. Just clean. You don't fix broken windows. A pause. By handing out hammers. A ripple ran through the crowd. Not a laugh. Not a gasp. Just a subtle wave of recognition. It was the kind of line that people don't just hear, they feel in their stomachs. Joy's jaw tightened. She looked up, eyes narrowed, like someone reaching for a last match in a windstorm. But it was Sunny who moved first. She tilted her head slightly, as if about to speak, then turned, briefly, toward Joy. And stopped. That pause. That microsecond of decision. It landed louder than any reply. Her eyes dropped again. And with a breath almost too quiet for the MIC to catch, she said, "Maybe we shouldn't have gone there." The crowd heard it. Barely. But they heard it. Not everyone. Just enough. Backstage, a segment producer nearly knocked over a monitor. Someone in the control booth mouthed, "Did she just say?" But the feed was already locked. Whoopi, across the table, held her posture. She was the veteran. The professional. The stabilizer. She tried to smile. Tried to rescue the segment with something safe, something practiced. But her eyes. They were no longer on Arnold. They were no longer on the table. They drifted past the cameras, toward the stage exit. Toward somewhere else. The audience caught it. Viewers might miss it in real time, but replay would catch it. The frame would freeze there. The look that said, "This is unraveling." Arnold didn't smile. He didn't press. He just sat in it, the tension, the silence, the break in format. He let it breathe. Then, he folded his hands, elbows still on the table, and said, not to the hosts, not to the crowd, but to the format itself, "If you ask a question just to trap someone, don't be surprised when the answer escapes." A murmur from the left side of the audience. Whoopi dropped her gaze for the first time that morning. Sunny reached for her pen, not to write, but to cap it. Joy looked down at her cards again. She flipped them once, then again, pages that had meant something at 9 a.m., now reduced to paper shuffling. Arnold stayed silent. He didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. He let the weight do the talking. And in that moment, frozen between egos and air conditioning, between broadcast rules and real human reaction, the table itself split. Not physically, but morally. It wasn't a segment anymore. It was a reckoning. The room was quieter now, not silent, but taut. Every host had said less in the last 5 minutes than they had all morning, and it wasn't because they'd run out of questions. It was because the questions no longer mattered. Arnold had said something they couldn't categorize. Not a policy. Not a slogan. Not even a position. It was a principle, and worse for them, it was resonating. Joy Behar reached again. This time, not with fury, but with performance. Her voice lifted an octave higher, the the tone rehearsed from years of cable rhythm. "Okay, Arnold," she said, aiming for levity with an edge. "So is knocking some new political strategy now? Should we all just line up politely and wait for someone like you to open the door?" A few scattered laughs from the audience, some real, some forced. Joy grinned, briefly, as if she'd struck something. But Arnold didn't react. He didn't blink, didn't twitch. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward her, calm, centered, and said, "It's not about who opens the door, Joy." A beat. Then his voice dropped into that low, glacial register, the kind that makes crowds hold their breath. "It's about whether we believe in the door at all." The crowd shifted. Audible now. Not loud, but undeniably leaning in. Arnold continued, "We talk about America like it's a concept, an idea, a conversation." He paused. "But a country is more than a feeling." His eyes stayed fixed on Joy. "It's a border. A process. A promise. If anyone can walk in, it's not a home. It's just a hallway." The sentence was soft, but it hit like a dropped weight. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it again, her brow twitching just slightly. Whoopi moved in, trying to reset tone. "So you're saying compassion is a weakness?" Arnold turned to her. "No, I'm saying boundaries are not cruelty. They are how we honor the compassion inside." There was a sudden stillness in the booth. The text didn't move. The audience didn't clap. They processed. One camera operator caught a woman, hands folded, whispering something inaudible to herself. Her husband beside her nodded. Not at her. At Arnold. Back at the table, Sonny re-entered. "But isn't this all convenient, Governor? It's easy to talk about doors when yours were opened by fame." There it was. The class attack. The smirk from Joy returned. This was a line that usually landed. Arnold looked at Sonny. And for the first time, his expression changed. Not defensively. Not angrily. But worn. A memory. "No one opened it, Sonny. They told me to wait. And I did." Then, after a pause so still it created its own gravity, he added, "I remember knocking, for years." There it was. Again. The phrase. But this time, it didn't explain. It reminded. The audience exhaled, collectively. This wasn't a metaphor anymore. It was lived reality, compacted into 6 words. Joy's smile faded. Whoopi looked down. Sonny froze mid-blink. The sentence had landed, not in the logic of debate, but in the marrow of experience. The crowd began to respond. Not with cheers. Not with shouting. But with an unsettling, spreading applause. Slow, rising, unstoppable. Someone stood. Then another. The room didn't explode. It swelled. Like water breaking through carefully built barricades. Arnold didn't react. He didn't gesture. He just looked at the panel, and waited. And they, for the first time that hour, had no more lines to throw. The standing ovation had no music. No cue card. No smile from the stage manager telling the audience to clap. It just happened. The sound rose like a slow rolling tide, deliberate and undeniable, the kind of applause that doesn't explode, but declares. That something had landed. That something had ended. Arnold didn't stand with them. He remained seated for another 3 seconds, letting the weight of his final words hang unchallenged, letting them breathe. Then, wordlessly, he rose. No nod. No wave. No grand gesture. Just a slow, upright motion, a figure separating himself from the set, not in victory, but in completion. Whoopi straightened in her chair, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes flicked offstage, once, then returned to the desk. She said nothing. Joy remained frozen. Her fingers pressed flat against a stack of note cards that had long lost their use. The top page had a bent corner. Her thumb hovered near it, then dropped. Sonny looked down. Then up. Then sideways at Joy, searching for cues. But there were none left. There was no script left to follow. Arnold didn't speak. He didn't reach for his water. He didn't look back. Instead, he brought one hand to his chest, just above his heart, and tapped lightly twice on the small, metallic lapel pin that had been there all along. The American flag. Worn. Familiar. Unspoken. Then he turned and walked. Not rushed. Not slow. Each step purposeful, echoing just enough across the studio floor to be picked up by the boom mic. The sound of exit. Not retreat. The sound of finality. Behind him, the camera caught everything. 3 hosts at one table. 3 different responses. Whoopi, eyes now fixed on the control room glass. Joy, still staring downward, her lips twitching as if searching for a line that wouldn't come. Sunny, resting one hand on the closed folder, not to lift it, not to open it, but as if to ground herself in something. The audience stood. Not all of them. But enough. One older man in the second row mouthed the words. He said what we all wanted to say. The woman next to him nodded, eyes misted. Up in the production booth, a voice cracked through the headset. We've lost the narrative. Don't cut yet. Let it ride. Let it ride. That was the phrase they used when the control room surrendered to something real. The B-cam tracked Arnold's back as he reached the edge of the stage. The lights didn't dim. There was no swelling outro music. Just the rhythm of his boots on the studio floor. And then, just as he disappeared from frame, Sunny whispered. No mic caught it clean, but the studio feed captured enough. That line, Joy glanced at her. Sunny looked up, almost in disbelief. It wasn't politics. Joy didn't answer. Behind them, the show's theme music kicked in late, not triumphant, but hollow. It was supposed to usher in the closing segment. A wrap-up. A cheerful reframe. But no one moved. There was nothing left to reframe. The screen began its slow pan across the crowd, still standing, still watching the space where Arnold had exited, as if the echo of the moment held more substance than anything they could now say aloud. The Chiron below read, coming up next, Weekend Movies. But nobody was watching the banner. They were watching the space he had left behind. And it said more than any closer ever could.